It's something of a studio dream to have one hardware device that can control literally everything, whether it's a 1980s FM synthesizer with a torturous two-line display for programming 200 different envelopes, or it's your favorite software synth software plugins, or even your DAW. But the more power you have in a single device, generally speaking, the more complex it becomes and the more, well, responsibility there is when you're trying to make it work for you. The Electra One doesn't really change this in a sense. It is still quite complex to get certain things working, and you're not going to be able to get it to function with some completely unheard of, not particularly popular 1980s device at the drop of a hat without learning to do some serious work under the hood. But it is probably the first of these sort of devices that's actually approachable by people whose entire job isn't coding or programming MIDI functionality. Apparently I have to do a proportion of the video outside if... That's all right, you can stay there. Oh. Okay, I can come out. Apparently I have to do a proportion of the video outside if Zoomers and Gen Alpha are actually going to watch it or like it, and also I'm supposed to pretend I can't use a clip-on mic for some reason and do this. It's a funny old world. Basically what you have is a MIDI controller with 12 continuous encoders, all of which are also capacitive, touch sensitive, and a large touch screen on the front and a metal body. A very well made thing, as I'll go on to in detail shortly. What really sets the Electra One and Mark II apart from the other devices though in the market is that most of them are just sending MIDI CCs from 0 to 128 or pitch bend or program change. This can send pretty much anything you can think of involving MIDI, from NRPNs, which are double CC high resolution controllers, through SysEx, hexadecimal SysEx data, which is system exclusive data that was used a lot of time in the 80s and earlier. Older synths in general and older devices in general used system exclusive to communicate, which is literally exclusive to each device pretty much. Even two devices from the same manufacturer might behave in entirely different ways, which is really handy. And yeah, you can do pretty much anything you want using the Lua scripting extension with it, from sending complex SysEx patches all in one go to having a single knob that performs multiple functions and sends data all over the place. As long as you can think of it, it can probably be done. And if it can't, someone in the community is likely to help you out to be able to do it, or the people who make the Electra One themselves will probably help you to do it too. So that's where it's really set apart. I've decided to keep the two appendices about creating patches at the end because they're quite long-winded and complex. Suffice it to say, I didn't know anything about Lua script or MIDI SysEx at all before I got this device, and after about 2 weeks or 3 weeks or so I was pretty comfortable with both. So yeah, it's not as hard as it looks. But yeah, now we'll get into things. If you'd like to have a look at some of those patches, they're after the conclusion at the end, and they're a bit more in-depth and detailed about how the coding actually works. Put that back on now. What is that thing about? Like, why is it supposed to be non-threatening or something if I don't know what the hell I'm doing and I hold the clip-on mic? I don't know, it's stupid. It's going back on for the rest of the video, sorry guys. Build quality wise, the Electra One actually really stands out. Most devices nowadays, I'm going to generalize here, but I think this is true, feel quite sort of plasticky, not particularly well made. The Electra One feels incredibly solid for something that's made in our current age. The encoders themselves, the knobs, are especially brilliant. They're all metal, the knobs are metal, they have a massive level of resistance, but not so much that it hurts or something. They just feel really, really solid and good. There is one 3D printed part along the back. Having looked at product design myself in the past for various different reasons, I can perfectly well understand this. If you were to go to the degree of making an injection molded part or something like that for this section, it would cost you a lot of money to get the molds created, and it would really eat into your profit margin for a low volume device. So it does make sense to make some parts 3D printed, so I don't resent this at all. I think the base is probably 3D printed as well, it might not be, but if it's along those lines, it's kind of a light plastic. Most of the device is taken up with a touch screen display. It's not a state-of-the-art display by any means. If you're used to looking at an OLED 120 Hz display, this is going to look slightly dimmer and less saturated and less smooth. But it doesn't really need to be state-of-the-art. This isn't for watching video. After all, it's just for looking at controls on a controller, so it definitely serves the purpose. Though an odd difference is the difference in how colors look in the editor for patches to how they look on the screen. They're much more desaturated on the screen. This could well be something to do with color values in software though, and how color values are being passed between the two rather than the display itself, but it's worth a mention. It's powered by USB. There's a USB 2 cable you can jack into the back. You can also find a way to mount a battery on it or carry a battery around with it and use WIDI or wireless MIDI to make the thing entirely portable, which is currently what I do in the studio. I've got wireless MIDI. That wireless MIDI is sending and receiving to a dongle that's plugged into the MRCC MIDI router, so I can carry this around the studio to other synthesizers, play them, fool around with their controls directly on the device there and then, so I don't really have to have it stuck in one place. That's quite useful. You've got two sets of MIDI ins and outs, so you can do all kinds of routing there. I only use one at the moment, but there's no reason you couldn't decide to sort of have one control called a performance control. So call it Performer 1 or what have you, and have it sending, you know, multiple controls all over the place using Lua scripting and Lua extensions. So it really is sort of limited by your imagination and your ability or your willingness to learn that ability. It can also host devices. I haven't used it for that yet, but you can plug other things into it. I'm assuming the thinking there is that you can extend its controls with another controller. As it is, it's so powerful, I've not felt the need to do that, but it's there if you want it. There's 6 rubber buttons on the front of the device. On the right, the top button is the patch request button that sends a patch request to a hardware synth, which should then do a SysEx dump or patch dump back to the Electra One that it can interpret so that its controls stay in sync with the controls on the device. That's kind of important if you're loading a patch on the device. On the middle right is a snapshot button. This allows you to essentially use the Electra One to store patches. It can be a patch library. That's very cool. It means if you've got a hardware synth where it's kind of annoying to store patches, or it has a battery backup that's unreliable, or you can't afford to go and spend a fortune finding the backup card on eBay for that synth, you can store patches in the Electra One itself. That's a very cool thing. The bottom button in the right is a page button, and that allows you to choose between the different pages in your given preset. You're going to need to use this because it's not usually possible to do every single function on a device in one page. So yeah, that'll allow you to really quickly switch between the different pages. In order to change entire presets, you currently have to perform a sort of thumb-based contortion by pressing the bottom right and the middle right button at the same time, which does work, but it's still a bit fiddly to do. Leading directly on from that, the left-hand side of the buttons, all 3 of those control the respective row of controls. Now, I don't need that at all because I use the touchscreen. I find it far faster to touch and control, meaning those rubber buttons are completely unused. So I'd much prefer it if I could have those buttons as previous and next page in the preset and then preset. Then I'd have no thumb contortion to do to get access to presets. I could just use those buttons. That isn't currently something you can do. I have put it in as a feature request, as have a few other people. So given how active development is, I'd likely expect that it'll appear as a feature at some point. But for now, you can't do that. Once you've got all of your devices set up and all your patches in there, it's a great experience. I have, I think, 5 devices fully programmed in there, plus DAW Control, which is a lot, so I can sit at the desk and easily control pretty much everything I need to. Out of those devices, pretty much all of them have some kind of quirk, and I even mean the modern ones. So for example, the KASSER DAFM has no MIDI out, so it can't send a patch request back, patch dump, sorry, back to the Electra One. A patch request will just go unheeded, so you can't keep them in sync that way round. You have to make your patch on the Electra One and store it in the in the Snapshot system. Another example would be the TG33, which is that old Yamaha that you've seen throughout this video. The patch is not complete as it stands. It was made by somebody else. I've carried it on, but it's still in progress. Not everything there is available to be changed. It's quite a difficult one to get going as well, so it's taking some time. The Dreadbox Nymphess has some quirks when doing a patch request. It doesn't quite act exactly how you'd want it to, and you have to go and do something on the device itself. So none of that's really the fault of the Electra One. It's just the nature of making something that's universal. You're going to have issues where those devices have their own quirks and strangenesses that you have to then work around and deal with. One particularly cool use for it, which I haven't actually set up yet, but I think is one of the best, is to make a DAW template project with all your favorite effects in it. Give them CCs, preset CCs, and then assign those CCs to an Electra One patch so that you have one page that allows you to control all of your most touched controls of different effects within your workstation. I think that's a very cool idea. I haven't done it yet. It's quite time consuming. It's not something I've gotten around to, but I think it's a good one to use it for. So even if you don't have sort of 80s esoteric hardware, you can use it for that. Also, we can't overlook the fact that this does actually breathe new life into weird old hardware. Things like the TG33 are a bit irritating to use. Lots of these old 80s synths have a couple of lines to work with on an LCD, which is just no fun. And there's plenty of things that now I've got the Electra One, I'm starting to think, oh, actually, I could buy one of those and really enjoy it now. Whereas before it would have been a real hassle to learn. Now I can sort of blow it open onto a modern interface and really have fun with it. Before buying something like the Electra One, it's worth investigating either A, whether the devices you have and want to use with it already have patches made for them, or whether you think you're capable of doing it yourself. And that's going to depend on a few things. One of them is, if you can't make it yourself or don't want to, whether someone in the community has already made it. It's very much a community-based device. So if it doesn't exist and you can't find someone to make it for you, you're going to have to do it. The other thing is whether that device has any bizarre idiosyncrasies which mean that the patch isn't going to be perfect. There are even modern devices where there's just something strange about how they've decided to implement control in that device or how it works or functions that means that the patch isn't going to be 100% perfect and is not going to be like 100% bespoke controller for that device. So you do have to take that into account and do your research. This is especially true in terms of DAW control. That's a very, very complex thing to get working. Most DAW control devices are coded for that function, for one DAW by the company who makes the DAW. So it's a difficult undertaking to make a third-party device speak perfectly to a DAW. Now, luckily, there are some brilliant people in the communities, and there's a full DAW control for Bitwig. There's a completely separate set of patches and scripts that allow you to control Ableton Live. There's some for Reaper as well. So if it's one of those sort of DAWs that those kind of people use, which I think is a fair statement to make about Bitwig, Reaper and Ableton, that is tinkerers and coders, then you're more likely to find a control patch for the Electra One for that DAW. Having said all of that, most software and hardware synthesizers nowadays already have a whole bank of CCs linked up to their in-depth controls. So if you're doing something like that, if you're making a patch just for a synthesizer that has CCs, it generally isn't that difficult to do. If you can use a web-based interface, dragging and dropping and type in a few numbers and feel free to give a few hours to it, then you're probably going to be able to get most things to work with it. Where things get very difficult is when you're dealing with a synthesizer from 1983 or something like that. Then you're going to have to go into the grand grimoire of SysEx at the back of the manual. Obviously, for any device like the Electra One, where the community itself is responsible for creating a big part of its function, the community size and engagement is really, really important. So far I found it to be great. I got lots of help when I just wanted to make one reversed control. I was given Lua code to do that, which I could reverse engineer a little bit and work out how to use it in the future. When it came to the PSS 480 patch, which was pretty difficult. I was able to find code, reverse engineer it, and ask for help during that. And also the online documentation is really good as well. So it's still difficult to do. It's not a walk in the park creating a patch for an old device or tweaking something, tweaking a patch for a device that has a strange way of working with CCs. But you know, you get help. You get a helping hand along the way. I mean, I even got an award on my profile for being involved so much during the first month of signing up. So they obviously appreciate people sort of being active in that community. So if you're going to buy a device like this, I definitely say get active in the community, talk to people there, and try and get involved in making your own patches and then publishing them so that you feel like you're a part of it, and so everyone can help everyone else out. You know, comment your code and that sort of thing. Just as with the tape synthesizer device that I also reviewed, which you can check out up here, I don't think it's for everyone. Obviously, all of this stuff can be done in other ways, technically, and for less money, but like that device did, this provides quite a unique experience and a unique way to control these things and to do these things. There is nothing else quite like it. It isn't an inexpensive device. So if you're looking to buy something like this, you have to have a reason, really, i.e. there are odd bits of hardware you like to use that need some kind of external control to make them usable, or you just really like the idea of using your own configured control surface for doing all kinds of hardware and software stuff in one place. There's no point in having it if you can't use it, and it is a significant investment, so you have to make sure that it is the right kind of device for you. If you're just looking for 8 controller knobs, you can go and buy those for £40 or something. I think there's that sort of OEM brand Sub-Zero, I think they're called, where you can buy things for 30 or 40 quid, just really basic plastic controller knobs. So if that's all you want, it definitely isn't the device for you. But if you're looking to do something a little bit more interesting and you like the idea that it functions entirely separate from a DAW, which I do, then it's worth investigating. In conclusion, I think the Electra One Mark II is an incredible device, and I think you should try it out, and you should try and have a go at programming things to make your ideal setup, frictionless studio. I think it's been around for around half a decade at this point, which is quite a long time, and it's now at the point where it's quite well developed. I think as I'm speaking, the operating system or firmware is on 3.6.2, which is quite a lot of versions along. It's on Mark II of the hardware specification itself. So the concept is becoming quite well developed at this point. And now that we have Lua scripting on top of that as well, there's a lot you can do with just this one device. I think it's finally reached that point where someone who isn't like a super comfortable coder who spends most of their time coding can actually sort of get stuck in and get rewarding results with it. And even if you aren't that comfortable with it, there's a lot of patches there now. So where before you would struggle to find most devices, now a lot of things are there, and before you purchase you can go and have a look and check that your device is there, check how much of the control is implemented, and even message and talk to the people who've made those patches to see how well it's working. So it really has sort of matured as a product now, and I think it's well worth investigating if this is your kind of thing, if you want to use old hardware but you want to make it more accessible. Here's a patch I made for a modern synth, the KASSER DAFM. It's a little box that has a Mega Drive or Genesis, depending which country you come from, Sega sound chip, the particular sound chip that was used in those, and turns it into a synth that you can control, but the controls for it itself are quite slow. It's just 2 knobs and 2 encoder knobs that you can press with 4 little OLED screens. And things like envelopes are particularly slow to adjust, so it really benefits from external control like this. In order to make something like this, I started by looking in the manual and working out how many CCs there were, and then I started laying out on a blank page all of these different faders and working out where I was going to put each operator and how I was going to split the pages up, which in this case is pretty much between the main operator controls and the envelope controls with some changes here. Key scaling is always one of those things I never really know where to dump it because I don't really use it that often. But yes. So working out your layout first is a really good idea, not just because of logic and to stop yourself having to redo work, but because inside the source code, every control gets assigned an ID. So if I pick one at random here, detune OP3, there is a fader with ID 25. And if you wanted to do code in here and wanted to address that fader directly, it's going to change if you end up deleting it and making a new one and so on. It's easy to accidentally change those IDs. So I like to lay it all out first. Everything in here was pretty simple, aside from the fact that the level envelopes have to be reversed. For some reason, the way that the KASSER was designed was so that the 127 is the maximum amount of gain reduction. So that's a reversed control. And you'd think logically that you'd click here and just make, well, I'll make the minimum 127 and that's 0, but it doesn't work. It doesn't think like that. So what you actually have to do is create a Lua function. So in the code in here, these are this is some boilerplate code that you can copy and paste everywhere you want, which is making 3 variables that just get the identification of the device from here. So the MIDI channel you're using for it and the MIDI port and so on. And it's worth using that boilerplate everywhere if you're going to do any Lua coding. But for example, here I've created a function. Oh, by the way, big thanks to Old Gear Guy on the forum who gave me this code here, which I then tweaked to make all the other functions I needed. Send rev level. So I've named that. I could have called it anything like banana or whatever. It would be fine. So it's using these variables that I've determined up the top, plus a new one that I'm getting here, which is the CC number itself of the currently touched knob. And then it's sending a control change using the port number, the MIDI channel it's found, the CC number it's found here. And then to invert a value, it's just the maximum value minus whatever the knob's at. So 127 minus 0 is 127. 127 minus 127 is 0, hence an inversion. And that's pretty simple. And as long as you, on that knob, put in, so it's parameter 16, CC 16, but it's a virtual control. A virtual control means it will use a function that you name here. It's also got a formatting function as well here. For some of the controls, it's a little bit more complex because the device expects 0 to 127, but it'll only change the value of the device every 8 values. So you'll be turning for ages while it does nothing. And that's what these functions here are doing. So AD level and SR level, this is sort of dividing 127 up into 4 and up into 8, depending, which is just a simple bit of maths there. In order to get that functioning. You can read about that if you really want to on my forum post. If you hunt around, you can find my forum post where I describe it in depth what that code is doing and why, but I think here it would be a bit long-winded and dull for people who aren't particularly interested in anything that's that deep. But yes, so you can see that in order to do things like stepping through values a bit more quickly or inverting a control, you do have to get a little bit of Lua code in there, but it's not an enormous amount and it's all kind of basic maths. Also, it's worth mentioning that these things here, where it's stepping through every 4 or 8 values as you turn up, could actually be done with a really simple array. So you could literally just write 0, 3, 7, whatever the set of values you actually want it to send are, and then tell it to just step through that array rather than using a mathematical function to do it. And that is actually technically faster, but that's just another bit of code fiddling. But the point is that to make a patch for something that mostly uses CCs, unless it's got funny reversed ones or funny stepping through, it's pretty simple to do. For these controls here, I also manually drew in these graphics. So when the value is 1, it shows that graphic. 2, it shows that graphic. And these are nice and fun. I mean, I literally, you just come in here and click to draw. And that's as simple as it is, and then it shows up on the screen. It's a very easy and nice to use little system to show up more interesting graphics on your screen than just numbers or a slider. Envelopes. One of the ways I like to do this is actually put 4 copies of the same envelope along. So I make one its entirety and assign the attack value to it, and then copy that and have them as the A, D, S, and R. And you'll see here that it means you have a separate knob already for all of them, and they all have the same displayed value. This shoulder thing, again, I had to draw these little lines in the value section there, but there is a technical downside to this, which means it's actually sending the control 4 times, but it just doesn't matter because all 4 of those are identical, and it's not going to swamp the MIDI input just sending that CC. So I've just accepted that as a quirk, that it's actually sending your control 4 times at once. It doesn't make a difference at all. When I was about 12 years old, I bought an ironically named computer called the Spectrum from an advert in a local newspaper, and started fooling around with BASIC code language. It was sort of literally called BASIC and was quite basic. At this point, these computers were kind of worthless, but I enjoyed loading programs that had already been done and sort of editing them to be a bit different. I remember a particularly funny one being a sort of, edgy teen fedora atheist edit of an old Christian game I found on a tape in a charity shop, a thrift store as Americans call it. But the point being, it's easier to reverse engineer and alter things that have already been done than it is just to totally work from scratch. So I wanted to make an Electra One patch for the Yamaha PSS480, and there's lots of PC-based editors around already. One is based in Controller. There's also a JS-based one that works in a browser with full source code here on GitHub. And so using these and some sort of sideways thinking in the PSS480 manual, I cut a lot of time off the development of the patch and learned it quite quickly. So here in the manual, you can see things you're going to need later on, like the SysEx header, the layout for a patch and data, and so on. I've got an RME interface. I think everyone should have an RME interface, really. It has 2 sets of MIDI I/O on it. So I just connected the MIDI out to the MIDI into and used it as a simple physical loopback to save me having to install loopback programs and so on. So tweaking controls on this editor, I could see that it only sends data when the knob's released. Basically, if you turn a knob really fast, when you're sending the entire SysEx program with every single value change in there, you'll just overload the device. It can't receive an entire patch every single time that a value changes on the Electra One. What you need to do instead is turn a knob and then have it send that entire SysEx patch when you release it, in order to not overload the poor little keyboard's tiny brain. Tweaking different knobs, you can see different numbers change for each knob being tweaked. And sometimes 2 change for one knob. And also the number before last always changes in what seems like a random pattern, which is great fun. This last number is in actual fact what's known as a checksum. It's used by the device to check that all the previous data is correct, so it's a sort of mathematical sum of those bytes, SysEx bytes that are sent. It's outlined here in the manual. As before, it's best to lay out all the controls before you start. That way the controls will have those IDs assigned to them and easy to search names. The JS-based 480 editor source code handily lists all the bytes commented, so we can see them here, and we can tweak an editor from 0 to maximum, watch those values change and make notes. I use Obsidian as a note-making app, and in Obsidian I gradually reverse engineered the list of controls so I could work out what a whole string is made up of. It's actually quite a fun puzzle if you're a bit Spectrum. So I realised that standard controls weren't going to cut it. A SysEx message system in the Electra One is a little hard for me to work with. In that I'd have to make a string out of all values, and those values would have to be functions anyway in order to deal with all the weird stepping and so on, so I might as well just write the whole thing in the Lua script. I didn't come up with the concept of how to send this data in a vacuum. I actually downloaded sort of patches of older gear from the same sort of period and just looked through code on a few of them, and by chance I found the Novation base station patch that exists already did a similar thing. It constructed a SysEx string all at once and then sent it all at once. So you sent every value in one go. In most programming, you have something called an array. An array is just a place to store numbers, and you can recall any address in an array whenever you like. Using this sort of array, we can create a whole patch to send the SysEx every time a knob is tweaked. So here's the whole SysEx message. Each number will be an entry in an array all the way up to 73. To make one control to rule them all, I made a big function. So every time you turn a knob, it's grabbing the value of every single control in your patch, putting them into an array, and then waiting for you to stop touching the knob before it sends it all over, followed by a program change, which is set on another control. We subscribe to knob events at the top, so the Electra One knows to bother listening for whether the knobs are being touched or not. And then we use these events, like touching or not touching, to control things. So our final sending of the array and patch change is only done when the knob is released. Populating the array is just a matter of plodding through one by one. Some controls are simple, other controls combine different controls together, so here you have to work out what a control is worth. For example, the sine table control goes 0, 4, 8, C. But this seems to add to another control, and it's split over 2 different bytes. Using an array-based system, it's pretty easy to step through the whole list of controls to build up this array, hopping backwards and forth between the manual and other code and so on. And arrays are really beneficial because you don't have to think in maths. They're just easy lists that make sense to people and to machines. You're not having to make an equation to work this stuff out. With code and everything else, it feels satisfying to make a really complicated mathematical equation, something where you can show off and go, look how complex my code is. But it's actually better in all ways, really, for the computer and for you, to make it as simple as you can and have as few complexities as possible. So as a result, wherever I can, I've just relied on typing it all out as a big array and adding together values from arrays and populating them to another array. And it's not having to do a lot that way. The processor really isn't having to work too hard. Once I got through that whole array, I had to tackle the checksum, which was quite hard. And I couldn't work out how to convert this from the JavaScript version into Lua. So I asked ChatGPT. It didn't get it quite right. It was expecting me to use a library called Bit, which doesn't seem to be implemented in the Electra One. And as I sort of wrangled with it, trying to get it to give me something that would work, it did get it wrong every time. But one of these particular bits, when I copied and pasted it in there, the one that looked like it would probably work, did actually work. So you can sort of feel your way through this as well with a bit of AI help. But yes, the patch works absolutely perfectly. You turn something, as soon as you release a control, it will send where it's at when you release it, which is great.